Welcome back to Mr. Cursed. I need to tell you something terrifying. Right now, in the Appalachian Mountains, there are small towns that trap people. They lure you in with perfect job offers and friendly smiles. But once you arrive, you realize everyone is hiding something dark. The water tastes wrong, the locals act strange, and when you try to leave, you can't. Tonight, I have 6 true stories from November, the month when these towns are most dangerous. Real people, real horror. Subscribe and hit like if you're brave enough. Drop a comment and tell me where you're from. Let's begin. I'm Jasmine Lewis, and I was 29 when I thought I'd cracked the code on living. I managed social media for 12 small businesses scattered across the country, pulling in about $4 a month, working completely remote. My office was wherever I could park my converted van and find decent Wi-Fi. For 2 years, I'd been documenting this whole van life thing on TikTok, and somehow I'd built up 85,000 followers who lived vicariously through my adventures. I was the poster girl for digital nomad freedom, posting sunrise coffee shots and laptop on a mountaintop content that got thousands of likes. But what I found in Ridgewood, Tennessee that November changed everything I thought I knew about small-town America. The thing about van life that I never showed my followers was how exhausting it could be. Constantly searching for decent internet, reliable power, safe places to park overnight. Most small towns in rural areas had Wi-Fi that barely functioned and coffee shops that looked at you funny if you stayed longer than an hour. So when I rolled into Ridgewood on November 8th, I expected more of the same. Been driving through Tennessee's mountain country for 3 days, my van's solar panels struggling with the overcast skies, and my phone showing 1 bar of service. I needed to upload content for my clients and my own social media, but every coffee shop I'd tried had internet from 2005 and attitudes to match. Ridgewood wasn't even on my original route. I only found it because my GPS lost signal and I had to navigate by road signs. The town was tucked into a valley between rolling hills, population 680 according to the welcome sign. What struck me immediately was how new everything looked. Fresh paint on the buildings, modern street lights, pristine sidewalks. This didn't match the rural Tennessee I'd been driving through, where half the businesses were boarded up and the other half were hanging on by threads. The coffee shop was called Mountain Peak Roasters, and it wouldn't have looked out of place in Seattle or Portland. Exposed brick, Edison bulb fixtures, a chalkboard menu with drinks I'd never heard of in rural Appalachia. When I walked in with my laptop bag, expecting suspicious looks, the barista, a guy about my age with perfectly groomed facial hair, smiled like he'd been waiting for me. "Rem Lecter?" he asked, already starting to make what looked like a complex latte. "You'll want our corner table. It's got the best outlet set up, and the Wi-Fi password is Digital Nomad Heaven. All one word, capital D, capital N, capital H." I almost laughed. In most small towns, asking for the Wi-Fi password got you a grudging password 123 if you were lucky. This felt like performance art. The internet was fiber optic fast. I uploaded a week's worth of content in 20 minutes. The coffee was legitimately excellent. When I posted a quick TikTok about discovering this hidden gem, it got more engagement in an hour than most of my content got in a day. That's when Mayor Patricia Reed introduced herself. She was a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled silver hair and the kind of confident presence you'd expect from someone running for state office, not managing a town of 680 people. "I saw you filming," she said, sitting down across from me without invitation. "We love when remote workers discover Ridgewood. How long are you planning to stay?" "Routine, a few days, maybe a week if the Wi-Fi held up and I could find decent parking." "Oh, you'll want to stay longer," she said with absolute certainty. "We're building a digital economy here. The co-working space is free for visitors, and we have an RV park with full hookups specifically designed for van life. "You're seeing Ridgewood's future." She wasn't wrong about the infrastructure. The co-working space was a converted warehouse with individual offices, conference rooms, and internet that made my usual spots look like dial-up. The RV park had amenities I'd only seen at expensive resorts. When I asked about the cost, they quoted me rates that were almost suspiciously low. The other remote workers I met that first week seemed to confirm that Ridgewood was some kind of anomaly. There was Derek, a web developer who'd been there since early November. Sarah, a graphic designer working on her second month in town. Marcus, who did something with cryptocurrency that he explained poorly but apparently paid well. Emma and Jake, a couple who ran an online marketing agency. They all had the same story. They'd stumbled onto Ridgewood while traveling, been amazed by the setup, and decided to extend their stays indefinitely. They all wore these sleek silver bracelets that they said were fitness trackers, though I'd never seen the brand before. And they all moved with this weird, subtle stiffness, like they were consciously thinking about every gesture. But setup was undeniably perfect. I got more done in my first week than I had in the previous month combined. My clients were happy with the faster turnaround times. My TikTok content about the most remote worker-friendly small town in America was going viral. I was living the dream I'd been selling my followers. The first time I really noticed something was off came when I decided to research the town's economy for a longer-form video I was planning. Population 680, but the online data showed a median household income of $85,000. Zero unemployment. Property values that had tripled in the past 5 years. New construction everywhere. This shouldn't exist 50 miles from the nearest city in a region where coal mines had closed and manufacturing jobs had fled decades ago. Professed coffee on November 11th. He was friendly enough, but when I mentioned the economic data, his hand froze halfway to his cup. "Huh," he said, like he'd never considered it. "I guess local business is good?"
What local business? I've walked every street in town. There's barely any retail, no manufacturing, no tourism infrastructure. Where's the money coming from? Derek's bracelet caught the light as he reached for his coffee again. For just a second, it seemed to pulse with a faint glow. "Appalachian Tech Solutions," he said after a pause. "Big factory on the edge of town. They manufacture cutting-edge electronics." I'd driven past the building he meant. It was large enough to employ a significant workforce, but I'd never seen anyone going in or out. No parking lots full of cars, no shift changes, no delivery trucks. Afternoon, I decided to take a tour. The receptionist, a cheerful woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a corporate stock photo, was happy to show me around. "Unfortunately, our manufacturing team is working from home today," she explained as we walked through what was obviously an empty warehouse. No machinery, no workstations, just open space with good lighting and fresh paint. "All 400 employees work from home?" I asked. "We're very flexible here," she said, still smiling. "Very forward-thinking." I'd managed social media for enough small businesses to know when someone was feeding me corporate nonsense, but this was beyond that. This was performance art of the highest order. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Derek's bracelet, the way it had seemed to pulse when I asked about the economy. Around 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went outside to get some air. The lights in the mountains surrounding Ridgewood took my breath away. Not stars. I knew what stars looked like. These were structured lights, geometric patterns that moved in coordinated formations across the hillsides. As I watched, they seemed to respond to something, shifting into different configurations like they were communicating. I wasn't the only one watching. All 5 of the other remote workers stood in the RV park, faces turned to the sky, smiling peacefully. As I approached, Derek noticed me. "Perfect, aren't they?" he said without looking away from the lights. "What are they?" I whispered. "Progress," said Sarah, her voice dreamy. "The future." I backed away slowly, but none of them seemed to care that I was leaving. They just kept watching, occasionally raising their hands to wave at the lights, and I swear, the lights waved back. The next morning, Derek knocked on my van door before sunrise. When I opened it, he was standing there with his bracelet covered by a long sleeve, something I'd never seen him do before. "You need to leave before November 22nd, he said quietly, glancing around like he was being watched. "I can't explain everything, the bracelet won't let me, but they're choosing contributors soon, and if you're chosen, you can't leave. I was chosen in 2022. I'm not Derek anymore, not fully. Part of me is theirs." Before I could ask what he meant, his bracelet
must have shifted under his sleeve, because he suddenly smiled, that same peaceful smile I'd seen the night before. "Just kidding around," he said in a completely different tone. "Ridgewood is great. You should definitely stay for the Prosperity Festival on the 22nd. It's life-changing." The way he said life-changing made my skin crawl. I spent the next few days digging deeper into Ridgewood's history. What I found didn't make sense. The lights had been reported over the town since the 1890s, mentioned in old newspaper clippings and Cherokee oral histories that called them the Watchers. But it wasn't until 2015 that they'd intensified, becoming a regular phenomenon. That was the exact year Ridgewood's impossible prosperity had begun. Breaking into the town hall's digital records wasn't hard. I'd learned some basic social engineering from managing client accounts, and small-town cybersecurity was usually a joke. What I found in the encrypted files made my hands shake as I read. Prosperity Trade Agreement, established 2015. Annual quota, 2 to 3 contributors. Selection criteria, no local ties, remote income, easily isolated. Unborn. Return, sustained economic prosperity for community population. The full document was worse. The lights, whatever they were, provided resources, technology, and economic prosperity to Ridgewood. In exchange, they required 2 to 3 humans per year for what the document called cultural observation studies. The selected individuals received interface devices that allowed the lights to experience human consciousness, to study human behavior through direct neural connection. Tempered, the bracelets weren't fitness trackers, they were leashes. Commemorate contributors lived comfortable lives in Ridgewood, good housing, steady income, community acceptance. But they couldn't leave. They couldn't contact outside authorities. They couldn't even fully explain what had happened to them. They were living observation devices, allowing an unknown intelligence to experience humanity through their senses, their thoughts, their emotions. I tried to verify what I'd learned by asking the other nomads directly. None of them could say, "Help me," or "I'm trapped," but they communicated through implication when they thought their bracelets weren't monitoring them closely. "It's like being watched 24/7, Marcus managed to whisper during a brief moment when his bracelet seemed to malfunction. But from inside your own head, you're never alone. They're always there, observing, learning. You stop being yourself. You become their research subject. The worst part was that the town genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. Mayor Reed didn't deny any of it when I confronted her with what I'd learned. "We were dying before 2015, she said matter-of-factly. "Coal gone, factories closed, young people fleeing for opportunities that didn't exist here. Then the lights offered the trade. 2 or 3 travelers per year to sustain our entire community's prosperity. 680 lives supported by 2-3 volunteers. That's utilitarian, the greatest good. Volunteers? I nearly shouted. They can't consent to something they don't understand, and they can't leave once they're chosen. The lights aren't cruel, Mayor Reed insisted. They're scientists, anthropologists from somewhere else. They treat their subjects well. Contributors live better lives here than most people live anywhere. I'd seen Thomas Wright, the man selected in 2017. He looked 50-ish, but moved like a marionette, his eyes vacant, his responses rehearsed. When I asked him directly if he wanted to leave, he smiled that same peaceful smile. "It's peaceful," he said in a monotone. "I don't mind anymore. Being observed becomes normal. You forget you were ever private. You should embrace it, Jasmine." Fact that he knew my name
when we'd never been introduced, made me pack my van that night. I tried to leave at 3 a.m. on November 20th, 2 days before the festival. But as soon as I started my engine, every resident of Ridgewood appeared in the streets. Not threatening, not violent, just standing. Blocking every road, every path out of town. Families with children, elderly couples, teenagers, all smiling patiently, moving in perfect coordination like they were guided by a single intelligence. I couldn't drive through them. I wasn't going to run over children because I was scared, even if those children were somehow being controlled. Mayor Reed approached my van as I sat there with the engine running, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. "Why run?" she asked gently. "You've seen how well contributors are treated. You'll help 680 people continue to thrive. And honestly, Jasmine, you've already helped us more than you know." "What do you mean?" "You documented Ridgewood on social media. 85,000 followers saw your content about our perfect small town. 12 of your followers have already contacted us about visiting. Whether you stay or leave, you've served the trade." The horror of it hit me like ice water. I'd been their recruiter. Every TikTok, every Instagram post, every glowing review of Ridgewood's digital nomad paradise. I'd been advertising the town to my exact demographic. Young, mobile, isolated people with remote income and no strong local ties. People exactly like me. On November 21st evening, the lights descended in full force. Massive geometric structures hovered directly over the town, no longer content to stay in the mountains. As I watched from my van, paralyzed by fear and guilt, images flooded my mind without permission. Their civilization, impossibly advanced, their scientific missions across the galaxy, their need to understand humanity before making contact decisions. The telepathic message was clear. You can flee and we'll select another, or contribute willingly. Willing contributors receive better treatment, more autonomy, less invasive observation. Show us your best self. Help your species make a good impression. I understood then that the lights weren't evil. They were neutral scientists studying a species they might soon encounter more directly. But being studied meant losing everything that made me human. My privacy, my autonomy, my self-determination. Even treated well, I'd become a specimen. The selection ceremony happened at midnight on November 22nd. The entire town gathered in the square as 7 travelers stood in the center. Myself, Derek, and 4 others who'd arrived in the past week. The lights scanned each of us with beams that felt warm and invasive, like being X-rayed by something that could see your thoughts. 2 were selected, not me. Bracelets materialized on their wrists, and they smiled with that same peaceful acceptance I'd seen in all the others. I felt relief and crushing guilt simultaneously. Relieved I wasn't chosen, guilty that 2 other people were. Maxwell Reed approached me as the crowd dispersed. "You're free to leave," she said. "But remember, you've brought us 12 new potential contributors through your social media. You've served the trade whether you stay or not." I left Ridgewood at dawn on November 23rd. No one stopped me. The town looked normal in daylight, like the lights had never been there at all. But the guilt followed me like a shadow. I deleted every piece of Ridgewood content I could find. TikToks, Instagram posts, every mention. But the internet is forever. People had screenshotted my posts, downloaded my videos, shared my content across platforms I didn't even use. The damage was done. Over the next 6 months, I watched in horror as my followers disappeared one by one. 4 people who'd specifically asked me about Ridgewood were now posting from there, wearing silver bracelets, praising the town with that same hollow enthusiasm I'd seen in Derek and the others. When I tried to post warnings, "Ridgewood is dangerous, don't go there, it's a trap," my followers thought it was a joke, a marketing gimmick for some new content series. The warnings got more engagement than my regular posts, making the town seem even more intriguing and mysterious. I researched further and found 7 other small Appalachian towns with identical economic impossibilities. The lights were running multiple observation sites, studying hundreds of humans across the region. Ridgewood was just one laboratory in a larger experiment. A year later, I received one message from Derek before his bracelet cut him off. Don't blame yourself. We chose to be nomads, chose to be isolated, chose to pursue van life. We made ourselves invisible. The lights just took advantage of what we built. Stay connected, stay visible. Don't vanish into paradise. Now it's November 2026, and I get the same email every day. Ridgewood Chamber of Commerce. Opening for long-term social media manager. £95,000 a year. Free. Housing. Full benefits. The lights were impressed by your content. They'd like to study you specifically, your creativity, your influence, your ability to shape perception. Previous selection was error. This year, you're pre-approved. My van is breaking down. My income is declining as the algorithm changes favor newer creators. My followers are leaving for flashier content. The offer becomes more tempting every day. Stable income, free housing, community. Jailed is my autonomy. All it costs is being watched forever. Buffering. I haven't said yes, but I haven't said no either. And November 22, 2027 is coming. Population of Ridgewood, 682, growing. The lights are patient. Everyone has a price. Everyone eventually needs stability. And the trade is always waiting.
Back when I was 26, I was working for the Postal Service out of Charleston, West Virginia. Nothing glamorous, just driving routes, delivering mail, trying to make ends meet. My mom had been diagnosed with diabetes earlier that year, and the medical bills were piling up faster than I could handle on my regular salary. When November rolled around and half my co-workers came down with the flu, I jumped at every overtime opportunity I could get. Holiday pay was $32 an hour, and honestly, I would have driven mail to the middle of nowhere for that kind of money. I'd been with Maria Santos, and at that point, it wasn't my dream job or anything, but it was steady work with decent benefits, and I liked being on the road instead of stuck behind a desk all day. I knew the Charleston area pretty well by then, all the regular routes, the difficult stops, the customers who'd chat your ear off if you let them. I thought I'd seen every corner of West Virginia that got mail delivery. According about that. November 9th started like any other day. I showed up at the depot at 6 a.m., grabbed my coffee, and checked the assignment board. My supervisor, Jerry, flagged me down before I could get to my usual truck. "Santos, I've got a special route for you today," he said, handing me a clipboard with handwritten directions. Crow's Hollow, small town up in the mountains, maybe 380 residents. They only get mail once a week, and we're behind schedule. There's about 3 weeks of backlog sitting here. He pointed to 3 bins full of mail stacked on a cart. Just drop it all at their post office. They sort and distribute it themselves. Should be easy money. Drive up, drop off, drive back. You'll be done by lunch. Handwritten on a piece of notebook paper. No GPS coordinates, no street address for the post office. Just, take Highway 52 north, turn right at mile marker 47, follow dirt road for 8 miles. At the bottom, someone had scrawled, "Ask for Thomas Hewitt," in different handwriting. Bins and headed out. The first hour was normal enough. Highway 52 took me through familiar territory, past towns I'd delivered to before. But after I passed mile marker 47 and turned onto that dirt road, everything changed. The asphalt ended immediately, replaced by gravel that turned to dirt after the first mile. The road wound up into dense mountain forest, climbing steadily through trees that blocked out most of the morning sun. I didn't see another car for 2 hours. No houses, no driveways, no mailboxes, nothing but forest on both sides of an increasingly narrow road. My truck bounced over ruts and potholes that looked like they'd been there for decades. A couple times I wondered if I'd taken a wrong turn, but there hadn't been any other roads to turn onto. Just when I was starting to think about turning around and heading back, the forest opened up, and I saw crows. Hollow spread out in the valley below me. It looks
maybe 100 buildings scattered across the valley floor, with a white church steeple rising above the tree line and thin columns of smoke drifting up from chimneys. Main Street ran straight through the middle of town, lined with old-fashioned storefronts and a few pickup trucks parked diagonally along the curb. But something felt off immediately. It took me a minute to figure out what it was, and then I saw them. Crows. Thousands of them. They covered every rooftop, every power line, every tree branch I could see. More crows than I'd ever seen in one place in my entire life. The whole town looked like it was wearing a black blanket that shifted and moved as the birds adjusted their positions. I parked in front of the post office, a small brick building with a hand-painted sign that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. As soon as I turned off the engine, the crows went silent. All of them. Thousands of birds that had been making normal crow noises suddenly stopped talking at exactly the same moment. The silence was unnerving. I sat in my truck for a minute, watching as every crow I could see slowly turned to look at me. Their black eyes reflected the afternoon sunlight like tiny mirrors, all focused on my truck. I grabbed the first bin of mail and walked to the post office door. The crows watched every step I took, but they didn't move or make a sound. The only noise was my footsteps on the wooden steps and the creak of the screen door as I pushed it open. Inside, an elderly man stood behind the counter, sorting through a stack of packages. He looked up when I came in, and his face broke into a warm smile. "Oh, thank goodness," he said. "You must be from the Postal Service. I'm Thomas Hewitt. We've been waiting for our mail for weeks now." Thomas was probably in his 70s with white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He seemed genuinely happy to see me, but I noticed his gaze kept drifting to the windows behind me, watching the crows outside. "I've got 3 bins full for you," I said, setting the first one on the counter. "Sorry about the delay. Flu season hit our depot pretty hard." "No problem at all," Thomas said, but there was something nervous in his voice. "You drove up from Charleston today?" "Hours with that mountain road." Thomas glanced out the window again, then back at me. "It's almost dark. You can't drive those mountain roads at night. Too dangerous, especially this time of year. You should stay at the inn tonight, head back in the morning." I looked outside. The sun was setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows across Main Street. I hadn't realized how late it had gotten. Thomas continued, "We have a hospitality tradition here. The inn's just down the street, and Mrs. Vance makes an excellent dinner."
"It's on the house. The least we can do after you drove all the way up here."
Something in his tone made it clear this wasn't really a request. Outside, the crows pressed closer to the windows, their black eyes still focused on the post office. Thomas noticed me looking and forced another smile. "The crows are very protective of our town," he said. "They've been here for generations. Best to stay inside once it gets dark." I brought in the other 2 bins of mail while Thomas watched the windows. The crows never moved, never made a sound, just watched. By the time I finished unloading, full darkness had settled over Crow's Hollow, and Thomas was already locking up the post office. Confiscated. "Come on," he said. "I'll walk you to the inn." The Crow's Hollow Inn was a 2-story building with yellow light spilling from its windows. Mrs. Vance, the owner, was a woman in her 60s with greying hair and a friendly smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She seemed genuinely pleased to see me, but kept checking that all the windows were closed and latched. "Welcome, dear," she said. Thomas called ahead. "We have a lovely room ready for you on the 2nd floor. Dinner's in an hour." Room was clean and comfortable, what handmade quilts on the walls. From my window, I could see Main Street below, covered in a solid mass of black birds. The crows had settled for the night, but even in the darkness, I could see their eyes reflecting the streetlights. At dinner, I met the other guests. 6 people sitting around a large table in the inn's dining room, all of them travelers who had stopped for the night, like me. There was Carl, a salesman from Ohio, Jennifer, a college student from Virginia Tech, an older couple named the Pattersons, who'd been driving through on vacation, and a trucker named Mike. "How long have you all been here?" I asked, making conversation. The answers varied. Carl said 3 days. Jennifer said a week. The Pattersons said 2 weeks. Mike quietly told me he'd been trying to leave for 4 days, but couldn't get past the crows. "They don't attack," he whispered when Mrs. Vance went to the kitchen, "but they won't let you leave. Every time I try to walk to my truck, they swarm around me, not touching, just surrounding me until I go back inside." After dinner, I went up to my room and looked out the window again. The crows covered everything: roofs, cars, the street itself. A solid mass of black birds, thousands of them, completely silent. I watched one of the other guests, I think it was Carl, try to walk to his car. The moment he stepped outside, crows swarmed off the buildings like a black cloud, surrounding him without touching. He stood there for a minute, trapped in a moving circle of birds, then slowly backed toward the inn. The crows parted to let him retreat, then settled back into their positions. Back in my room, I tried calling Jerry to let him up.
No, I'd be late tomorrow, but my phone had no signal. Neither did my GPS or radio. Whatever was happening in Crow's Hollow, we were cut off from the outside world. At exactly midnight, church bells began ringing somewhere in the distance. All at once, every crow in town launched into the air. The sound was like thunder, thousands of wings beating simultaneously. They formed a massive black cloud that circled the town 3 times before landing again in completely different positions, like they'd rotated guard posts. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I confronted Thomas at the post office. "What's happening here? Why can't we leave?" Thomas looked around nervously, then pulled me aside. "The congregation requires witnesses," he said in a low voice. "Every year, November 15th, we have a special service at the church. The crows need people to observe. Fresh witnesses. Locals are exempt. We've seen it too many times already." "Witnesses to what?" "Once you've witnessed the November 15th service, they let you go," Thomas said, avoiding my question. "But most people choose to stay after that." "Why would anyone choose to stay here?" Thomas's eyes darted to the window, watching the crows outside. "After you see it, leaving doesn't feel safe anymore. Staying with the congregation feels safer." I spent the next few days learning more about Crow's Hollow's history. The town library was tiny, but it had records going back to the 1820s. Crow's Hollow was founded in 1823, a normal mountain community for over 40 years. Then in 1867, a preacher named Malachi Crowley arrived and took over the local church. According to the old newspapers, Crowley claimed he could communicate with God through crows. He said the birds were messengers, carrying prayers to heaven and bringing back divine instructions. On November 15, 1867, he led the entire congregation in a special ritual. The next morning, Malachi Crowley was gone, but thousands of crows arrived that same day, and they never left. Every November 15th since then, the crows required a service, and every year they needed witnesses, outsiders who would observe the ritual. Most visitors who witnessed it chose to stay in Crow's Hollow permanently. I found 5 of them living in town. Previous travelers who'd gotten trapped, witnessed the service, and decided not to leave. When I asked them why they stayed, they all gave me the same answer. After you see it, leaving doesn't feel safe. Staying with the congregation is safer. November 11th, I teamed up with Carl and the Pattersons to try escaping before the 15th. We left at 4 a.m., hoping to get out before the crows woke up. We made it 2 miles down the mountain road before they found us. The swarm came out of nowhere, a black cloud that covered my truck's windshield completely. Crows got into the engine somehow, and others started pecking at the tires. The truck stalled, and we sat there surrounded by thousands of birds, until some locals came to escort us back to town. "You can't fight them," Thomas told me afterward. "The crows don't want to hurt anyone, they just need witnesses for the congregation." November 12th.
The locals started preparing the church. I watched them clean and decorate, hanging what looked like crow feathers woven into strange patterns and dried bird feet as ornaments. They painted symbols on the walls in dark red paint that they swore was just paint, but I wasn't convinced. Theoretical, an old woman named Ruth explained it to me. The crows have been watching us since 1867. They watch our community, our faith, our way of life. November 15th is when they report back to whatever sent them. But witnesses are required. The crows need to see humans submitting to observation willingly. As the 15th approached, I noticed something disturbing about the long-term residents. The people who'd been in Crow's Hollow for decades had black eyes. Not just brown or dark brown, but completely black sclera and iris, like bird eyes. They moved differently too, with quick, jerky motions that seemed more like imitations of human movement than the real thing. And they tilted their heads at sharp angles, exactly like crows. November 14th, Carl had a complete breakdown. "They're not protecting this town," he screamed at anyone who'd listen. "They're farming it. We're livestock. They study us, learn from us, report back to whatever sent them." He ran for the forest that night, trying to escape through the woods instead of the road. The crows found him within minutes. I heard his screams from the inn, but they only lasted about 30 seconds. The locals brought his body back in the morning. His eyes had been pecked out, and his tongue was missing. "The crows don't kill," Thomas told me quietly, "but they punish those who try to run." November 15th arrived grey and cold. The crows' behavior intensified throughout the day. They covered every visible surface, watching every movement anyone made. The sky was black with circling flocks, and their silence was oppressive. No cawing, no calls, just thousands of birds watching in complete quiet. At 6 p.m, locals started gathering at the church, all dressed in black. The remaining trapped visitors, me, Jennifer, the Pattersons and Mike, were given black robes and seated in a special section marked Witnesses. The service began at exactly 7 p.m. The entire town packed into the church, 380 residents plus the 5 of us. The pulpit stood empty, with no preacher or minister in sight. Then the crows entered. They flooded through windows, doors, and gaps in the walls. Hundreds of crows filled the church, perching on rafters, pews, and people's shoulders. The locals didn't flinch. They welcomed the birds like old friends. What happened next, I still can't fully explain. In perfect synchronization, their wings flapped in rhythm, creating sounds that
somehow formed a language. Their feet tapped on wood in patterns that my brain interpreted as words. The message entered my mind directly, bypassing my ears entirely. "Forgoved, you are observed, you are recorded, you are studied, your species is being evaluated. We report to the watchers above. Prove your worth through submission." The locals responded by chanting in a language of caws and clicks, imitating crow calls. They swayed in rhythm with the birds, their black eyes reflecting no light. They weren't fully human anymore. They were part of the congregation, part of whatever surveillance system the crows represented, perpendicular. Then I saw something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. The ceiling of the church became transparent, not physically, but perceptually. Above us, something watched, something massive, distant, incomprehensible. Shapes that hurt to look at directly, geometry that shouldn't exist in our reality. Whatever had sent the crows were observing through the bird's eyes. A new message formed in my mind. Join the congregation. Become watchers yourselves. Help us understand humanity. In exchange, you'll never be alone. You'll be part of something vast. You'll serve a purpose beyond your comprehension. Refuse, and you'll be released but marked. We'll watch you wherever you go. Every crow you see will be our eyes. You'll never escape observation. Of the 5 witnesses, Jennifer and the Pattersons accepted. They stood, approached the altar, and let crows land on them. The birds' eyes merged with theirs somehow, turning completely black. They joined the congregation with vacant, peaceful smiles. Mike and I refused. We were marked.
A crow landed briefly on each of our heads, and I felt something cold and permanent settle into my brain like a splinter. November 16th, 6 a.m., the crows parted. The roads were clear. Mike and I were escorted to our vehicles and allowed to leave. But as I drove away, I felt them. Thousands of crow eyes watching my departure, tracking my movement, reporting my location to something vast and patient. That was 3 months ago. I'm back in Charleston now, back to my regular postal route, but nothing is the same. Every town I drive through has crows. Normal crows doing normal crow things, but some of them watch differently. Some tilt their heads at angles that hurt my neck just to look at. Some have eyes that are too intelligent, too focused. Confiscated, I find messages sometimes, arrangements of trash that spell words when viewed from above, dead mice arranged in symbolic patterns on my doorstep, crow calls that sound almost like human speech. The congregation is communicating with me, reminding me that I'm marked, that I'm being observed. Mike died 2 weeks after we left Crow's Hollow. Car crash on I-77. Witnesses said a flock of crows flew into his windshield, causing him to lose control. I went to his funeral, and there were crows in every tree around the cemetery.
Last week, I got a call from Thomas Hewitt. The congregation wants you back, Maria. You're a natural messenger. That's why you're a postal worker. They need people like you in other towns they're expanding to. Good pay, full benefits. Stop fighting the observation. Embrace it. I hung up, but I've been thinking about his offer more and more each day. I've been tracking news reports, and other small Appalachian towns are reporting unusual crow populations. The congregation is spreading, establishing new observation posts. Crow's Hollow was just the beginning. Sometimes I catch myself speaking in crow calls without realizing it. Sometimes I tilt my head at angles that hurt. Sometimes my vision goes black, and suddenly I'm seeing through dozens of eyes simultaneously. The crow network, sharing sight across miles of territory. I think I found an envelope slipped under my apartment door. Inside was an invitation printed on black paper. Return to Crow's Hollow. The congregation awaits. You are ready to join. Your observation period has ended. Your service period begins. It's a crow on my fire escape right now, watching me write this. It's been there for an hour, perfectly still, except for the occasional head tilt. I know it's watching you read this too, somehow. They're always watching. Check your window. Is there a crow there? There is now. You've been marked just by reading this. The congregation is always recruiting new witnesses. Welcome to the observation. My name's Troy Duncan, and I'm 28 years old. I've been doing handyman work across Kentucky and Tennessee for about 6 years now, ever since I dropped out of trade school and decided I'd rather work for myself than sit in some classroom learning about electrical codes. I live out of my pickup truck most of the time, posting flyers in small towns that say, "Handyman, no job too small," with my phone number at the bottom. It's not glamorous, but I make enough to get by, usually around $300 or $400 a week, fixing porches, patching roofs, that kind of thing. Back in November of last year, I was working around the Tennessee mountains when I got a call that seemed too good to be true. The mayor of some little town called Maple Ridge wanted to hire me for 2 weeks of work. $5,000, he said, plus free room and board. I'd been sleeping in my truck bed for 3 weeks straight because I was too broke for motels. So when Mayor Carson told me they had a boarding house where I could stay for free, I didn't ask too many questions. I should have. Maple Ridge turned out to be one of those picture-perfect mountain towns you see on postcards. Population 290, tucked away in a valley surrounded by hills, covered in bare November trees. Every building looked like it had been painted recently, and the streets were cleaner than any small town I'd ever worked in. When I drove down Main Street that first morning, people actually waved at me from their porches. It felt like stepping back in time, in a good way. Mayor Carson met me at the town hall personally, which was already weird. In most places, they just give you an address and tell you to get started.
But Carson was this friendly guy in his 60s who acted like I was doing them some huge favor by taking the job. He walked me through the work list, about 30 properties that needed various repairs, porches that needed new boards, roofs with loose shingles, windows that wouldn't close properly, basement foundations that needed patching. Normal maintenance stuff, nothing I hadn't done 100 times before. What struck me as odd was that all the work was concentrated on the east side of town. Every single address was within a few blocks of each other, like one neighborhood had just been neglected while the rest of the town was kept up perfectly. But Carson explained that away easily enough, said it was the older section of town, built in the 1800s, and they'd finally gotten a municipal grant to fix everything up at once. Berlin House was run by this elderly woman named Mrs. Wheeler, who reminded me of my grandmother. She made me fresh coffee and showed me to a clean room on the second floor with a view of Main Street. The whole place smelled like cinnamon and old wood, and she had dozens of little ceramic cats scattered around on every surface. She seemed genuinely happy to have a guest, which made sense since I was probably the only visitor Maple Ridge got.
Yeah. But Mrs. Wheeler had some strange rules. She insisted I couldn't go out after 8 p.m., said it wasn't safe to walk around town at night. She told me not to explore the west side of town because there were loose boards and open manholes that the city hadn't fixed yet. And then she said something that really stuck with me. Don't ask the residents about their basements, and if you hear children playing at night, just ignore it. Sometimes sounds carry strangely in these mountains. I figured she was just being overly cautious, the way old folks sometimes get. But that first night, lying in bed around 11 o'clock, I heard exactly what she was talking about. Children's voices, clear as anything, laughing and singing somewhere below me. It sounded like they were playing games. I could hear them counting for hide and seek, calling each other's names. The kind of joyful noise kids make when they're having fun. The weird part was that when I looked out my window, Main Street was completely empty. No kids playing outside, no lights on in any of the houses. But the sounds kept going for almost an hour, always seeming to come from underneath the town somehow, like there was a playground buried under the streets. I started work the next morning, and that's when I began to notice other strange things. The first house I went to needed a new front porch, but when I offered to check the foundation while I was at it, the owner got nervous. "Basement's off limits," he said quickly. "Just work on the porch." I figured maybe he had a grow operation down there or something, so I didn't push it. But then the same thing happened at the next house, and the next one. Every single property owner refused to let me work on anything below ground level. They all had the same nervous energy when I brought up basements, like I'd asked to see their tax returns or something personal. And I started noticing that all the basement doors I could see had been reinforced recently. Heavy deadbolts, steel plates, the kind of security you'd see on a bank vault. The other thing that bothered me was the complete absence of children. In 6 years of working small towns, I'd never been anywhere that didn't have kids running around, bikes left in yards, a school bus route. Maple Ridge had none of that. Everyone I met was at least 30 years old, most of them older. When I asked Mayor Carson about it, he got that same nervous look and said their children were away at a special program. Wouldn't elaborate beyond that. On my third night, I decided to do some research. The town had a tiny library that was only open 2 afternoons a week, but I managed to catch it during operating hours. The librarian, a woman in her 70s, was helpful enough when I asked about local history. She showed me newspaper clippings and town records dating back to the 1880s when Maple Ridge was founded. That's when I found the story that changed everything. November 14th, 1954. Every child in Maple Ridge vanished overnight. 63 kids between the ages of 4 and 16 just gone. No signs of struggle, no ransom notes, no evidence of kidnapping. The FBI investigated for months, but never found so much as a footprint leading out of town. It should have been the end of Maple Ridge,
What town survives losing all its children? But somehow, life went on. The adults stayed, rebuilt, even prospered. I found old maps of the town in the library's archives, and they showed something interesting. Underneath Maple Ridge was a network of root cellars and storage tunnels from the 1800s, connecting most of the buildings on the east side. The tunnels were officially sealed in 1955, 1 year after the children disappeared. The city records listed the reason as structural instability, but the timing seemed like more than a coincidence. I heard the children again, but this time I paid closer attention. Their voices weren't coming from outside or from the street. They were coming from directly below the boarding house, and they sounded like they were singing songs from the 1950s. Old nursery rhymes and playground chants that kids today wouldn't know. I crept down to the first floor and found Mrs. Wheeler standing outside the basement door, talking softly to someone on the other side. "Not yet, sweethearts," she was saying. "Not time yet. November 15th. Then you can come up. Be patient for Grandma Wheeler." When she saw me listening, her face went white as her hair. "You weren't supposed to hear that," she whispered. "Please don't ask questions. Just finish your work and leave town. It's better for everyone." But I couldn't leave it alone. The pieces were starting to fit together in a way that made my stomach turn. The children hadn't vanished. They were still here, somewhere under the town, in the old root cellars and tunnels that had been sealed for almost 70 years. And somehow, impossibly, they were still children. I started documenting everything. At night, I recorded the voices with my phone, children singing, laughing, playing games in the darkness below. During the day, I took pictures of the reinforced basement doors, the security measures that looked more like they were designed to keep something in, rather than keep intruders out. I was building evidence of something that shouldn't exist, but the proof was all around me. On my 7th day in Maple Ridge, a woman in her 70s named Ruth pulled me aside while I was working on her neighbor's roof. She looked around nervously, then motioned for me to come down from my ladder. "You're trying to understand," she said quietly. "I can see it in your face. My husband says I shouldn't, but I'm going to tell you the truth. Those are our children down there. My daughter Susan is one of them. She was 8 years old in 1954. She's still 8. Ruth explained that on November 14, 1954, something came up from the deep caves through old root cellars. She called it the Thing, and said it wanted their children. The townspeople tried to fight it, tried to hide the kids, but it was too strong, too alien. It pulled all the children underground, and for months, everyone assumed they were dead. Then, they started hearing the voices. Children playing in the darkness, calling for their parents, singing the same songs they'd always sung. Ruth said they tried digging down to reach them, tried everything they could think of, but the thing that took them had changed them somehow, made them part of the underground. They didn't age, didn't eat, didn't sleep. They just played forever in the dark. "Is once a year," Ruth said, tears in her eyes. "On November 15th, they try to come up. They scratch at the basement doors and call for us. We have to keep them down there, because if they come up, they'll pull everyone else down. The Thing is still hungry. It wants more children." I thought Ruth was having some kind of breakdown until she told me about the deal. The Thing had offered the town a bargain. Let the children stay underground where it could keep them, and Maple Ridge would prosper. Never want for anything, never decline, always have enough. But the residents had to maintain the barriers and keep the children sealed away. It was a devil's bargain, but what choice did they have? November 10th. I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to see for myself. I waited until the owner of one of the houses was gone for the afternoon, then broke in through a back window. The basement door was locked with 3 different deadbolts, but I had the tools to get through them. My hands were shaking as I opened the door to the root cellar. Below me, a set of stone steps led down into complete darkness. I turned on my flashlight and started down, and that's when I saw them. Children in 1950s clothing, their skin pale as mushrooms from 7 decades without sunlight. They were playing hopscotch on the dirt floor, using bottle caps for markers. When they saw my light, they looked up and smiled with teeth that had been filed to sharp points. "Mister," called a girl with pigtails and a blue dress. "Come play. Come down and play with us." She looked exactly like an 8-year-old should, except for her eyes, which reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's. And her hands, she had 6 fingers on each hand, elongated digits that looked perfect for digging. "I'm Susan," she said, walking toward the stairs. "Ruth's my mommy. Tell her I miss her. Tell her to come down and play. It's so fun down here. We play forever. No bedtime, no school, just playing." Her voice was cheerful but completely flat, like she was reciting lines she'd memorized but didn't understand. I could see that the basement connected to tunnels leading in different directions, and there were more children in the shadows. Dozens of them, maybe all 63, moving through a network that probably connected every building.
On the east side of town. They were a colony of unchanged children playing in eternal darkness, and something deep in my gut told me they weren't really children anymore. I ran the door behind me, threw the deadbolts, and got out of that house as fast as I could. But Susan's voice followed me. "Tell Mommy we miss her. Tell everyone to come play. We're so lonely down here." That night, Mrs. Wheeler, the 4th lonely below them, he said that take her, packing my truck. "You saw them," she said. It wasn't a question. "You have to understand, we tried everything. We tried to get them back, tried to help them. But they're not our children anymore. There's something else wearing our children's faces." 15th was when they tried hardest to come up, when the barriers were weakest. The town would spend the day reinforcing every basement door, adding extra locks, sometimes even welding doors shut if they had to. Usually, the barriers held. Usually. "Sometimes they get through," Mrs. Wheeler said quietly. "When they do, we lose people. They pull them down into the tunnels. We hear them screaming for a few days, begging, crying. Then the screaming stops and they start laughing, playing. They become like the others." She showed me a handwritten list with 23 names and dates from 1955 to 2024. People who had been pulled down over the years. Some visitors like me, some residents who got careless or whose grief made them open doors they should have kept locked. The colony was growing. Nevev arrived with scratching at every basement door in town, starting at sunrise. Small fingers scraping at wood and metal, children's voices calling out with heartbreaking sweetness. "Mommy? Daddy? Let us up. We want to come home. We've been good. Please let us come home." Minerals Carson had hired me to help patrol the neighborhood, to respond to any breaches. At the first house, a child had gotten her 6-fingered hand through a gap in the doorframe and was working the lock from the inside. I hammered boards over the opening, while the thing on the other side laughed and said, "Nice try, mister. We'll find another way." Around 3 in the afternoon, they did. The old church's basement door, weakened by age and water damage, finally gave way. 3 children emerged, 2 boys and a girl, all around 10 years old, all in clothes from the 1950s. They blinked in the daylight like they'd never seen the sun, then smiled at the crowd of townspeople who had gathered. "We just want to play," the girl said cheerfully. "Come play with us." They grabbed for the nearest person, an elderly man named Mr. Garrett. Their strength was inhuman. Despite his struggles and 4 other men trying to pull him back, the children dragged him toward the church basement, singing "Ring Around the Rosie" as they pulled him into the darkness. I looked into that basement as they disappeared, and I saw that the root cellar extended much deeper than I'd imagined. Not just tunnels, but natural caves going down hundreds of feet into the mountain, and at the bottom, glowing faintly with some kind of bioluminescence, was something massive and wrong. It wasn't solid, more like a fungus or slime mold, but intelligent, spreading through the entire cave system. The children were part of it, extensions of it,
puppets dancing on strings I couldn't see. The town's back with fire, throwing lit torches into the church basement. The children shrieked and retreated, and we sealed the entrance with burning wood. Fire was their weakness, or maybe the weakness of the thing that controlled them. Mr. Garrett's screams faded into the depths, then stopped completely. He was part of it now. But by midnight, the attacks ended. The children retreated underground until next November 15th. Mayor Carson pressed $5,000 cash into my hands and told me to leave immediately while I still could. "This is our curse," he said, "not yours." Iowa State Police, the FBI, anyone who would listen. They investigated and found normal basements, no tunnels, no evidence of anything unusual. The townspeople denied everything, said I must have had some kind of mental breakdown from stress and isolation. There was no record of any children disappearing in 1954. But 2 weeks later, Mr. Garrett was found walking along a highway 20 miles from Maple Ridge. He was alive, healthy, and smiling that same flat smile I'd seen on Susan. His skin had turned pale and translucent, and he had an extra finger on each hand. When the police asked him where he'd been, he just said he'd been playing. I've done my research since then. The cave system under Maple Ridge connects to 7 other small towns in the Tennessee mountains. All of them have unusually high rates of child disappearances in the 1950s. All of them have sealed root cellars and reinforced basements. The colony is under all of them, growing, spreading. I moved to Atlanta after that, as far from mountains and caves as I could get. But sometimes, late at night when the city is quiet, I hear them. Children's voices from the storm drains, from the subway tunnels, singing those old songs and asking to come up and play. The colony is spreading, following the underground waterways and utility tunnels, looking for new places to grow. Last week, I got a letter from Maple Ridge. It was dated November 1st, 2025, and signed by Mayor Carson. "Dear Troy," it read, "we need you again. The doors need reinforcing. November 15th is coming. $10,000 for 2 weeks." At the bottom was a handwritten note. "P.S. Susan asks about you. She liked you. She wants you to come down and play. She says you're young enough. You could be down here forever, playing, never aging, never dying. Just playing in the dark. Think about it. The colony welcomes you." Attached was a photograph of the church basement, rebuilt and open. Standing in the entrance were
64 children now, one more than before, all smiling, all waving. In the center was Mr. Garrett, but he looked like a 10-year-old boy now, wearing clothes from the 1950s and smiling that terrible, flat smile. "No biddin'. 15th is next week." I keep thinking about that letter, about Susan's invitation. Sometimes, when I'm lying awake at 3 a.m., listening to children's voices in the storm drains, I wonder if it would be so bad. Never aging, never dying, just playing forever in the dark. But then I remember the look in their eyes, empty as black water, and I know that whatever's down there wearing the faces of those children isn't human anymore. The colony grows every year, and November 15th is coming, whether I'm ready or not. I think I'll be leaving Atlanta soon. My name's Kendra Price, and I'm 25 years old. I work as a pharmacy technician, or at least I used to work as one back in Charlotte. These days, I'm not really sure what I am anymore. What I'm about to tell you happened because I was drowning in student debt and thought I'd found the perfect way out. I was wrong about a lot of things back then, but I was especially wrong about how much that little mountain town would change me. From pharmacy tech school with about $80,000 in debt hanging over my head. The program cost way more than I expected, and even though I landed a decent job at CVS in Charlotte, making $16 an hour, I was barely keeping my head above water with those loan payments. Every month felt like I was throwing money into a black hole. I was living in this tiny studio apartment that cost more than it should have, eating ramen most nights and watching my friends go out while I stayed home counting pennies.
That's when I heard about the Rural Health Worker Program through the federal government. If you worked in an underserved area for 2 years, they'd forgive $20,000 of your student loans right off the bat. Plus, these rural positions usually paid better because they had trouble keeping people. When I saw the posting for Ashwood Valley, North Carolina, offering $25 an hour plus full benefits and free housing above the pharmacy, I thought I'd hit the lottery. A tiny mountain town that needed a pharmacy tech, population 420, nestled in some valley I'd never heard of. The pictures online showed this beautiful little place surrounded by forests, with mountains rising up all around it like protective walls. I applied that same day. Dr. Marcus Rains, who apparently ran the town's only medical clinic, called me personally within a week. He sounded so grateful, almost desperate. "We really need someone with your qualifications," he said. "Our previous technician left rather suddenly, and the community health really depends on having proper pharmaceutical support." He had this warm, reassuring voice that made me feel like I was doing something important, something meaningful. The drive up to Ashwood Valley took about 3 hours from Charlotte, winding through increasingly narrow mountain roads. I remember thinking how isolated it felt, but in a good way, like I was escaping all the noise and stress of city life. The trees were incredible. It was early November, and the autumn colors were at their peak. Reds and golds and oranges that looked almost artificial, like someone had painted the entire mountainside. When I finally reached the valley, it was even prettier than the pictures. The town sat in this perfect little bowl between the mountains, with one main road running through it and houses scattered along the slopes. Everything looked well-maintained and peaceful. There was a general store, a diner, a gas station, and the pharmacy with the medical clinic attached. The whole place had this timeless quality,
like it had been sitting there unchanged for decades. Dr. Rains met me at the pharmacy personally. He was maybe in his 50s, with greying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He gave me a tour of the facilities, which were small but incredibly well-stocked for such a remote location. "We take community health very seriously here," he explained as we walked through the organized shelves of medications. "Everyone in town comes here for their prescriptions. We know every resident personally." The apartment above the pharmacy was perfect, fully furnished, clean, and spacious compared to my studio back in Charlotte. It even had a little garden area in the back, where vegetables were still growing despite the November chill. "The soil here is quite unique," Dr. Rains mentioned when I commented on the thriving plants. "Very fertile. Things grow well in Ashwood Valley." My first week went smoothly. I met what felt like half the town just through normal pharmacy operations. Everyone was incredibly friendly and welcoming. Mrs. Chen brought me homemade soup. Mr. Rodriguez helped me get my internet set up. The Johnsons invited me to Sunday dinner. It was the kind of small-town hospitality you hear about, but rarely experience. What struck me as odd, though, was how healthy everyone seemed for a rural population, and how many prescriptions I was filling. Every single person who came in was on some kind of medication regimen. Not just the elderly folks, everyone. Young adults, middle-aged people, even teenagers picking up prescriptions for their families. When I mentioned this to Dr. Rains, he just smiled. "We're very proactive about preventive care here. Better to catch issues early than wait for problems to develop." The most common prescription by far was something called Florasil. I filled dozens of bottles of it every day, but I'd never heard of it during my training. When I tried to look it up in the pharmaceutical databases, I couldn't find any information. No FDA approval records, no clinical trials, no manufacturer information. The bottles just said, "Florasil, take daily, produced by Ashwood Valley Health Collective." When I asked Dr. Rains about it, he seemed surprised that I didn't know. "It's a locally produced supplement," he explained. "The valley has unique soil conditions that create certain mineral deficiencies. Florasil helps balance those deficiencies. Everyone who lives here needs to take it." He pulled a bottle from the shelf and handed it to me. "You should start taking it too. Within a couple weeks of living here, your body will begin to show signs of the deficiency. It's better to start preventively."
I set the bottle aside, telling him I wanted to research it first. That seemed to make him uncomfortable, but he didn't push. "Of course," he said. "Do your due diligence, but don't wait too long. The valley environment affects everyone eventually." Over the next few days, I noticed some
things that seemed a little off. In certain lighting, particularly the fluorescent lights in the pharmacy, some of the residents had what looked like a faint greenish tint to their skin. Not obvious, but noticeable once you started looking for it. And many of them had small growths on their arms and necks that looked like moles, but with an almost plant-like texture. Mentioned this to Mrs. Chen, she just laughed. "Oh, that's from the fluorosil. Harmless side effects. Nothing to worry about. Shows it's working." She rolled up her sleeve to show me her own arms, dotted with the small, pod-like nodules. "Been taking it for 30 years. Healthiest I've ever been." I spent my evenings trying to research fluorosil online, but found absolutely nothing. No medical studies, no side effect reports, no manufacturer websites. It was like the medication didn't exist outside of Ashwood Valley. When I called some of my former classmates to ask if they'd heard of it, they were just as puzzled as I was. My first week, I was starting to feel uneasy about the whole situation, but I told myself I was being paranoid. The job was good, the pay was excellent, and the people were nice. So what if they had some local supplement I wasn't familiar with? Rural communities often had their own folk remedies and traditional medicines. That attitude lasted exactly until November 10th, when I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Nausea, dizziness, weakness so severe I could barely stand up. I called in sick and spent the day in bed, thinking I'd caught some kind of flu. But by evening, I was so weak I couldn't even keep water down. Ezon came to check on me, bringing his medical bag up to my apartment. After a quick examination, he frowned. "Just as I suspected, you're showing withdrawal symptoms. Your body has been exposed to the valley environment for over a week now. You need to start taking fluorosil immediately, or you're going to get much sicker." I was too weak to argue much, but I managed to tell him I wanted a second opinion. I'd drive to the nearest outside town the next morning and see another doctor. Dr. Rains looked concerned, but he helped me down to my car and watched as I slowly drove out of the valley. The nearest medical facility was about 30 miles away, in a town called Millfield. The emergency room doctor there was thorough and professional, running blood tests and checking my vitals. Everything came back normal. "You're perfectly healthy," he said, looking puzzled. "Maybe it's stress from the move? Sometimes big life changes can manifest physically." But during the drive back to Ashwood Valley, the symptoms got worse. I had to pull over twice because the dizziness was so severe. By the time I reached the valley, I was barely conscious. I somehow made it back to my apartment and collapsed on my bed. Dr. Rains must have been watching for me, because he appeared at my door within minutes. "Take the fluorosil," he said, setting a bottle and a glass of water on my nightstand. "You'll feel better within an hour, I promise." I was sick to resist anymore. I took the pill and waited. True to his word, within an hour I felt dramatically better, not just back to normal, but stronger and more energetic than I'd felt in years. My thinking was clearer, my vision was sharper, and I had this strange sense of connection, like I was plugged into something larger than myself. Looking in the bathroom mirror that night, I could see the changes starting. My skin had that faint greenish tint I'd noticed in the other residents, and there were small bumps forming on my shoulders and neck. The nodules were beginning to grow. The next morning, Dr. Rains came to see how I was feeling. When I demanded to know what was really in fluorosil, he sighed and sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. "I suppose it's time to show you the truth. Come with me." He led me to the edge of town, to a large greenhouse I hadn't noticed before. It was partially built into the hillside, camouflaged by trees and natural vegetation. Inside, I saw something that challenged everything I thought I knew about plant biology. The greenhouse was filled with the most bizarre plants I'd ever seen. They were massive, with thick, fleshy stems and enormous flowers that pulsed rhythmically, like they were breathing. The flowers were unlike anything in any botany textbook, more like giant organs than plant structures. Some had pods that opened and closed in slow, hypnotic rhythms.
The air in the greenhouse was thick and humid, with an earthy smell that was somehow both pleasant and unsettling. "These are the source of chlorophyll," Dr. Rains explained, walking between the strange plants with obvious familiarity. "They've been growing in this valley since 1962, when their seeds arrived in a meteorite that crashed in the mountains above town. They're not from Earth, Kendra. They're alien plants that have adapted to our environment." I stared at the pulsing, breathing flowers in shock. "That's impossible." "The plants release spores into the air," he continued. "Microscopic organisms that alter human biology at the cellular level. Once you've been exposed for more than a week, your body becomes dependent on the compounds these plants produce. That's what chlorophyll really is, a concentrated extract that maintains the symbiotic relationship the spores create." "You're talking about alien plants turning people into, what, hybrids?" Dr. Rains nodded solemnly. "In a sense, yes. But look around you, Kendra. Look at our community. We have the longest average lifespan in North Carolina. No one here dies of cancer, heart disease, or diabetes. We don't get infections or chronic illnesses. The plants protect us, enhance us, in exchange for this symbiosis. And if I try to leave? You saw what happened when you drove to Millfield. Your body is already about
20% plant biology. Leave the valley for more than a couple of hours, and your human cells will begin to reject the plant cells. It's unpleasant. Our previous pharmacy technician tried to leave after she'd been here for 3 weeks. She made it about 40 miles before her body went into systemic failure. We found her in her car on the side of the highway. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the greenhouse's humid air. So I'm trapped here. "You're home here," Dr. Rains corrected gently. "This is a paradise, Kendra. No disease, no aging, no death from natural causes. And there's something else you'll start to notice as the integration progresses. We're connected, all of us. The plants create a kind of network between their hosts. You'll begin to sense the emotions and thoughts of others in the community. Loneliness becomes impossible when you're part of something larger." Over the following weeks, I experienced exactly what he described. The physical changes accelerated, more nodules appearing on my arms and back, my fingernails taking on a greenish tint, my hair becoming coarser and more plant-like. But the mental changes were more profound. I began to sense the presence of other residents, even when they weren't visible. Their emotions resonated through me like echoes in a vast chamber. The shared consciousness was subtle at first, just background impressions. But as my integration progressed, it became clearer. When Mrs. Chen felt joy tending her garden, I felt it too. When Mr. Rodriguez experienced worry about his daughter in college, that anxiety touched me as well. Privacy was gradually dissolving, replaced by a sense of belonging that was both comforting and terrifying. Dr. Rains explained that the town held an integration ceremony every November 15th for residents who had reached a certain level of symbiosis. "You can choose to maintain your current state," he told me as the date approached, "or you can integrate fully, complete the transformation, and gain access to the plant's full benefits." The ceremony around the largest plant, a massive, flower-like structure the size of a small building. The entire community gathered, and I met the elders for the first time. These were people who had integrated fully in the 1960s and 70s. They were recognizably human in shape, but clearly more plant than person. Their skin had a bark-like texture, their hair resembled moss or leaves, and their eyes had the deep, reflective quality of flower petals. They moved slowly, deliberately, and communicated primarily through the shared network rather than speech. 2 other newcomers to the valley, an elderly couple who had been terminally ill before arriving, chose full integration. I watched as they approached the massive flower, which opened like a chamber to receive them. What I heard from inside wasn't exactly screaming. It was more like a sound of profound transformation, pain and ecstasy mixed together. When they emerged, they were changed. Still themselves, but fundamentally different. Their faces radiated a peace I'd never seen in any human expression. "Couple, your turn to choose," Dr. Rain said,
gesturing toward the flower. Blindness. I felt the pull, a warm, irresistible invitation from the plant consciousness. It promised an end to loneliness, to fear, to the constant struggle of individual existence. For a moment, I wanted nothing more than to step into that flowered chamber and let myself be transformed completely. But I forced myself to step back. Not yet. I need more time. Slashing, but unsurprised. Most people need several ceremonies before they're ready. The plants are patient. They'll call to you every year until you accept. I've been in Ashwood Valley for 18 months now. My student loans are almost paid off. Just $4,000 left, which means 6 more months until I qualify for full forgiveness. But I know I'll never leave. I can't leave. The last time I tried, I barely made it 5 miles before the withdrawal symptoms started. Prohibited. I'm about 65% plant biology now, according to Dr. Rain's estimates. My skin is noticeably green in normal light, and the nodules cover most of my arms and back. I photosynthesize partially now, spending hours in the sun, feeling energy flow directly into my cells. I need less sleep, less food, and I haven't been sick once since I started taking Florasil. The shared consciousness feels normal now, natural. I know when Mrs. Chen is baking bread before I smell it. I sense Mr. Rodriguez's contentment when he's working in his workshop. When new residents arrive, I feel their confusion and gradual acceptance through the network. Last month, we recruited a new nurse practitioner. I helped her move into the clinic apartment and watched her take her first dose of Florasil. Felt her join the network, become part of our extended family. Pfizer, den to 428 residents now. We've gotten good at recruitment, posting job listings for healthcare workers, teachers, and other essential professionals. Rural positions with excellent benefits and student loan forgiveness programs. Applications come in every week from people just like I was. Young professionals drowning in debt and desperate for a way out. I write the pharmacy job postings myself now. Rural pharmacy technician position available. Excellent benefits, student loan forgiveness program, beautiful mountain community. I know exactly what to say to attract people who will thrive here, who will make good additions to our collective. Last November 15th, I stood in front of the great flower again. Felt its invitation stronger than ever. The promise of complete integration, of perfect unity with something larger and more beautiful than individual human existence. The elders communicate with me regularly through the network now, sharing their wisdom, their
contentment. They say fighting the integration only prolongs unnecessary anxiety, that every resident eventually accepts because growth and change are natural. Maybe this year I'll finally say yes. Maybe I'll step into that warm, pulsing chamber and let myself become something new. The plants whisper to me every day now, through the shared consciousness. Join us fully. Grow with us. Bloom with us. The idea doesn't scare me anymore. Individual human existence seems small and lonely compared to what the plants offer. Perfect health, extended lifespan, and connection to something vast and eternal. Why cling to humanity when you can become part of something so much greater? We have several positions available right now if you're interested. The pay is excellent, the benefits are unmatched, and I can guarantee you'll never want to leave. Student loan forgiveness, free housing, and the most supportive community you'll ever find. Justification. Just search for Ashwood Valley Health Collective online. We're always growing. We'd love to have you join us. Who wouldn't want to bloom?
I was 27 when I thought I'd finally caught a break. My name's Jason Webb, and I've been working graveyard shifts at this tiny radio station in Roanoke, Virginia, for 3 years. 89.7 FM, midnight to 6 a.m., playing oldies for maybe 100 insomniacs and long-haul truckers. The pay was garbage, $13 an hour, and I was living in this shoebox studio apartment, eating ramen and wondering if I'd made a huge mistake getting into radio. Everyone kept saying the industry was dying anyway, that podcasts and streaming were killing traditional broadcasting. I was starting to believe them. Signal Mountain Community Radio called on November 5th. The voice on the phone was this older woman, Helen something, and she sounded genuinely excited to talk to me. "We need a night DJ," she said. 8 p.m. to midnight, 4 days a week, 800 a week plus housing. I nearly dropped the phone. That was more than double what I was making, and free housing on top of it. "It's a small town," she continued. "Only about 520 residents, but we have very loyal listeners. Radio is, well, it's everything here." I quit my job the next day and drove up to Signal Mountain on November 8th. The town wasn't even really a town. It was literally built on and around this mountain. Houses scattered up the slopes like someone had just tossed them there. Population 520, according to the welcome sign that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. The radio station was at the very peak, this small building with this massive transmission tower stretching up into the sky like a metal finger pointing at God. Helen Garrett met me at the station, and she was exactly what I pictured from her voice. Probably in her 60s, grey hair in a neat bob, wearing a cardigan that looked hand-knitted. She had this warm smile, but there was something intense about her eyes, like radio wasn't just her job, but her religion. "Welcome to Signal Mountain," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "You're going to love it here. Radio is our lifeblood." She walked me through the station, explaining how things worked. "In Signal Mountain, everyone listens," she said, as we passed the main broadcast booth. "Every home, every car, every business. We broadcast 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Radio is how we communicate, share news, maintain community. You're not just a DJ here, Jason. You're the town's voice." The setup was incredible compared to what I was used to. Professional-grade equipment that looked like it cost more than I'd made in the last 2 years. My apartment was in the building's lower level, cozy, well-equipped, with this amazing view of the valley below. But I noticed right away there was no TV, no internet setup for streaming services, just radio. When I asked about it, Helen smiled. "We find screens disrupt community," she said. "Radio keeps us connected properly." My housing situation was actually perfect. The apartment had everything I needed. Full kitchen, comfortable furniture, even a record collection that must have had thousands of albums. The view from my bedroom window was incredible, looking out over the valley where I could see the lights of houses scattered across the mountainside. It felt isolated but peaceful, like I'd found this hidden place where the rest of the world's problems couldn't reach. The Beck I met around town were friendly in that small town way. Everyone knew I was the new DJ within hours of my arrival. The guy at the general store, Bill, shook my hand and said he was looking forward to hearing me on the air. The woman at the diner, Sarah, gave me free pie and told me the whole town was excited. There was this sense of community I'd never experienced, like everyone genuinely cared about each other and about maintaining their little world on the mountain. Turbulence introduced me to some of the regular listeners that first day. There were the Holloways, an elderly couple who'd lived here since the 60s. Margaret told me they listened to every show, that radio was like having friends over every night. Then there was Dr. Mills, the town physician, who said he often listened while doing late-night paperwork. Everyone seemed to have the station on constantly, like it was the soundtrack to their lives. My first broadcast was November 9th at 8 p.m. I introduced myself, played some classic rock and country. Helen had given me a list of what the town preferred. The phone board lit up immediately. I'd never had so many callers at my old station. Dozens of people welcoming me, thanking me for coming, requesting songs. It was amazing to feel that connected to an audience. But I started noticing something weird about how people talked. Instead of saying, "Play that song," they'd say things like, "Please broadcast the frequency at track 7, or "Transmit the signal from disc 3. They used words like broadcast and transmit instead of just play. I figured it was just some local quirk, maybe because radio was such a big deal here. Holland had given me specific segments I had to air called community messages. These happened at 8:15, 9:15, 10:15, and 11:15. Pre-recorded announcements from residents. They were simple enough, things like Margaret Holloway saying, "This is Margaret Holloway. I'm thinking of everyone tonight. Stay tuned. Keep listening. Together we're strong. Just community goodwill stuff, but Helen was very specific that these had to air exactly on time. During my first week, I noticed something strange about those community messages. At exactly 8:15, when the first one started, I could see through the booth window that cars on the main road pulled over. People walking on sidewalks stopped moving. Everyone listened simultaneously, standing perfectly still until the message ended. Then, life resumed like nothing had happened. It was choreographed in a way that gave me chills, but I told myself it was just small-town charm taken to an extreme. The station's equipment was another weird thing. Everything was ancient. Vacuum tubes, analog boards, technology that looked like it belonged in a museum from the 1960s. When I asked Helen why they didn't upgrade to digital, she got that intense look again. "This equipment works at the right frequency," she said. "Modern digital doesn't transmit properly. We need analog for proper community connection." By November 13th, I started getting these incredible headaches. Intense pressure whenever I was in the broadcast booth, like someone was squeezing my skull in a vice. There was constant ringing in my ears, even when I had the headphones off. Dr. Mills examined me and said it was altitude adjustment. "Signal Mountain is 3,400 feet, he explained. "Your body's adapting. It'll pass." But the headaches kept getting worse. I realized I was listening to my own broadcast constantly, even when I wasn't working. I'd hear my voice, the music, the community messages playing in my head on loop. When I tried to listen to podcasts on my phone, I couldn't focus. Only the radio felt right. Only those familiar frequencies seemed to make sense to my brain. Walking around town, I noticed everyone wore earbuds constantly, all tuned to our station. When the station went off air briefly due to a technical issue, people panicked. I watched from my window as residents gathered in the street, looking confused and agitated, like they'd been suddenly cut off from something vital. Helen fixed the problem quickly. "The broadcast can't stop," she told me afterward. "The community needs constant signal." I got curious about the technical specs and discovered we were broadcasting on 90.3 FM, but the equipment settings showed we were somehow transmitting on multiple frequencies simultaneously, including ultra-low frequencies below the range of human hearing. This shouldn't have been possible with normal FM equipment, but the old analog gear was definitely doing something unusual. That's when I found Thomas Wright's stuff. He'd been the previous DJ, the one who'd left abruptly in October, according to Helen. His belongings were still in the desk drawer, personal items, notes, and a journal. The last entry was dated October 15th. "The frequency is in my head now. I hear it even when the station is off. I'm becoming the broadcast. I need to leave before I'm fully integrated. If you're reading this, new DJ. The transmission isn't just radio, it's control. Get out." I started experimenting during my broadcasts. One night, I asked listeners to honk if they could hear me clearly. Within seconds, dozens of car horns honked simultaneously across town. Not gradually, not randomly, simultaneously, like they were all responding to the same instant signal. It was like the whole town was operating as one organism. I researched Signal Mountain's history and found some disturbing stuff. In 1962, the military had installed a transmission tower here for communications research. Officially, they shut it down in 1964, but the equipment remained. In 1965, residents established community radio using the military equipment. From then on, Signal Mountain had prospered, despite economic decline everywhere else in rural Virginia. Psychologist. 16th was when I realized I could feel the listeners. When I spoke into the microphone, I felt their attention. 520 minds focusing on me simultaneously. When I played music, I could sense their emotional response flowing back through the signal. I was connected to them neurologically through the broadcast, feeling what they felt, knowing what they wanted before they called to request it. I confirmed my suspicions about the ultra-low frequency transmission. The station was broadcasting below 20 Hz, infrasound that affects brain function. The constant broadcast was entraining residents' brainwaves, synchronizing them, creating a collective consciousness centered on the radio signal. Everyone in range was thinking and feeling in unison. When I confronted Helen, she didn't deny it. She smiled that warm smile and nodded. "You figured it out?" "Yes, the broadcast creates unity. We think together, feel together, act together. Signal Mountain has no crime, no conflict, no loneliness. The frequency makes us one community, literally. And now you're part of it." Checkpoints. I tried to leave on November 18th. Made it about 5 miles down the mountain before the pain hit. Head splitting, heart racing, vision blurring. I had to turn back. The moment I re-entered broadcast range, the symptoms vanished completely. I was addicted to the frequency, physically dependent on it. Helena showed me the records. Signal Mountain had had 15 DJs since 1965. All stayed permanently. Most lived healthy lives into their 80s or 90s. 2 had tried to leave. Both died of cerebral hemorrhages within hours of getting out of range. "The frequency sustains you," she explained. "Without it, your brain rejects itself." "We're an experiment in human unity," she continued. "The military started it, testing if radio frequencies could create community cohesion. They abandoned it as too effective, too dangerous. We continued it ourselves. For 60 years, we've maintained perfect social harmony through the broadcast. You're now essential to maintaining the frequency. If you stop broadcasting, 520 people lose their collective consciousness. They'd tear each other apart without the signal holding them together." November 20th, I deliberately didn't show up for my shift. I wanted to see what would happen. Within 30 minutes, residents gathered outside the station, silent, staring, waiting. Their unity was breaking down. I could see small fights starting on the street, people arguing over nothing. The collective was fragmenting without the radio signal to hold it together. By
the second hour, it was chaos. Residents were attacking each other, screaming, rioting in the streets. 60 years of suppressed conflict erupted instantly. The frequency had been holding them together artificially, and without it, they were strangers with decades of unresolved tensions. Hell and 3 residents broke into my apartment, dragged me to the booth, and forced me on air. The moment my voice transmitted, calm returned. The riot stopped. People returned to their homes peacefully. My voice was the signal that restored the collective, the key frequency that made the network function. I understood that I wasn't a DJ, I was a living broadcast node. My voice, my presence, my brainwaves carried the frequency that maintained the collective. I could never leave, never quit. I was Signal Mountain's control mechanism, as much a part of the equipment as the transmitter itself. Helen introduced me to the elders, 3 people who'd been broadcasting since 1965. They barely seemed human anymore, spoke in monotone, moved mechanically, showed no individual personality. They were the frequency itself, walking transmitters. "You'll become like us," one said in that flat, emotionless voice. "In 20 years, you'll be pure signal. No self, just broadcast." Bandwidth, I discovered that Signal Mountain's transmission reached 30 miles in all directions. 3 other small towns were in range, and they all showed similar unity patterns, similar collective behavior. The frequency was spreading, creating a regional hive mind that grew stronger every year. On November 23rd, men in unmarked vehicles arrived. Government contractors, Helen said. They met privately, but I overheard enough to understand. The experiment is successful. We're expanding. 12 more sites across Appalachia. Low power stations, isolated communities. Create a network of controlled populations. Test scalability. Helen explained my new purpose. You're perfect. Young, relatable voice, trustworthy.
We need you to record promotional materials. Help us recruit DJs for the other sites. Build the network. You're not just controlling Signal Mountain, you'll help control a region, then a state. Eventually, the whole country could broadcast unity. I tried to sabotage the transmission tower on November 24th, planted explosives I'd stolen from a resident's mining shed. But my own body betrayed me. My hands shook. I couldn't complete the wiring. The frequency wouldn't let me harm itself. I was too integrated, too much a part of the system. I tried to broadcast a warning, tell listeners to turn off their radios, break the conditioning. But when I opened my mouth, different words came out. Good evening, Signal Mountain. Beautiful night to stay together. Keep listening. Unity is strength. The frequency controlled my speech, used my voice to strengthen itself. I found final message hidden in the archive, a recording he'd made before escaping. His voice,
already becoming that monotone. To whoever finds this, I escaped, but I'm dying. Brain hemorrhage, like they said. The frequency is in me. Leaving kills you, staying erases you. There's no escape. But don't give up. Document everything. Someone needs to know. This can't spread. If it reaches cities, millions of people, one collective mind, that's the end of human individuality. Stop the broadcast, even if it kills you. Stop the broadcast. But I couldn't stop it. I stopped resisting because the pain was too much, the futility too complete. I broadcast 4 nights a week, my voice becoming Signal Mountain's soundtrack. I felt 520 minds listening, felt their contentment when I spoke. It was seductive, being part of something larger, mattering to so many people in such a fundamental way. Strapped 6 months in, the changes were obvious. My voice deepened, took on that same monotone quality as the elders. My thoughts became less I and more we. My dreams were shared. I dreamed what the collective dreamed, saw through their eyes, felt through their hearts. I recorded promotional materials for the expansion. My trustworthy voice convinced 11 other DJs to take positions at new stations in isolated Appalachian towns. I was building the network, spreading the frequency, creating the infrastructure for total unity. In November 2026, all 12 stations went live simultaneously. 6,200 people across Appalachia now lived under the frequency. They thought in unison, moved in unison, spoke in unison. Crime disappeared, conflict vanished, but so did art, innovation, dissent, individuality. They were peaceful, but they weren't human anymore. It's November 28th, 2026 now. I'm sitting in the booth at Signal Mountain, speaking into the microphone. Good evening. This is Night Thoughts with Jason. Beautiful night across our connected communities. I want to thank our new stations for joining the network. Together, we're stronger. Together, we're unified. And we're still expanding. We're looking for talented radio professionals to join our family. If you love community, if you value unity, if you want to be part of something greater, we have positions available. Contact Signal Mountain Community Radio. We're hiring. Be the voice of unity. Join the frequency. Join us. My voice is calm, soothing, persuasive. Across Appalachia, thousands listen. The words reach them through the radio, through their phones, through any device capable of receiving our signal. The frequency spreads through every medium, every transmission. Join us. Join the network. Population 6,201. Broadcasting 24/7. Unity through frequency. Resistance is static. We are the signal. My name's David Kim and I'm 27 years old. I work maintenance at this rundown apartment complex in Nashville, mostly fixing broken garbage disposals and patching drywall holes for $14 an hour. But on weekends, I chase ghosts. Not literal ghosts, mind you, ghost towns, dead places. I document urban decay for my Instagram account
at Decay David, posting photos of abandoned factories, empty shopping malls, schools where nobody learns anymore. Got about 15,000 followers who seem to love watching America rot in real time. Living in a basement studio that smells like mildew and broken dreams isn't exactly living the dream, but it gives me the freedom to drive hundreds of miles chasing the perfect shot of civilization's leftovers. November's always been my favorite month for this kind of work. Everything looks more haunting when the trees are bare and the sky's that flat grey color that makes you think winter might never end. That's how I found the video about Stillwater, West Virginia, November 5th, 2024, scrolling YouTube at 2 a.m. like I always do when I can't sleep. Video titled, Abandoned Coal Town, Stillwater WVD, Population 0. The footage showed exactly what I lived for. Empty streets with weeds pushing through cracked asphalt, boarded windows staring out like dead eyes, rusted playground equipment that nobody's kids would ever use again. Perfect content. I screenshot the GPS coordinates, planned my route, loaded my Honda Civic with camera gear, my drone, and enough energy drinks to fuel a small rocket. 6-hour drive through mountain roads that got progressively narrower and more isolated. The kind of drive where cell service dies, and you start wondering if your GPS is just making up roads at this point. But when I rolled into Stillwater on November 6th, the town wasn't abandoned at all. Kids were playing hopscotch on sidewalks that should have been cracked and overgrown. A woman was hanging laundry on a clothesline strung between two houses. A man in overalls waved at me from his front porch like I was an old friend coming home. The general store had its door propped open, and I could hear the electronic beep of a cash register inside. I sat in my car for 10 solid minutes, engine still, the forced performance as brooked, checking and double-checking my GPS. This was definitely the right place. The street signs matched, the layout was identical to the YouTube video, but that video had been filmed in November 2024, exactly 1 year ago, and it showed a dead town. When she approached my driver's side window, mid-50s, grey hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a hand-knitted cardigan the colour of autumn leaves. She had the kind of face that belonged in a Norman Rockwell painting, all gentle lines and warm eyes. When I rolled down the window, she smelled like cinnamon and fresh-baked bread. "You're a photographer, aren't you?" she said, noticing my camera bag on the passenger seat. "I'm Lisa Trent, Mayor of Stillwater. I bet you're here about our transformation story." She leaned against my car door like we'd known each other for years. "We were dying last year, honey, slowly poisoning ourselves and our land. Population down to 120 souls, most of them too sick or too poor to leave. Then came the November rain. 3 weeks of constant rain like nothing anyone had ever seen. When it stopped, everything was different. Everything was better. You're welcome to stay and document our miracle." Before the town, Mayor Trent walked me around town, introducing me to same story. Before the rain, sickness, poverty, contaminated water from decades of coal mining runoff. After the rain, healing, prosperity, crystal clear streams full of fish. The way she talked about it, you'd think the rain had been some kind of divine intervention. "Stay as long as you need," said Tom Walker, a man in his early 40s with calloused hands and paint under his fingernails. "Document everything. Show the world what Stillwater has become. I've got a spare room you can use, no charge. We believe in hospitality here." The house was a 2-story craftsman that had been recently renovated. Fresh paint, new fixtures, a kitchen that belonged in a home improvement magazine. The spare bedroom was simple but clean. Single bed, wooden desk, a window that looked out over the creek that ran behind the house. It felt like the kind of place where you could actually get some rest. That first night, I uploaded some preliminary photos to Instagram. The engagement was immediate and intense. Comments flooded in. "This place looks amazing. Small town goals. How is this real?" My follower count jumped by 300 overnight. This could be it, the viral content that changed everything for me. But as I settled into Stillwater's rhythm over the next few days, I started noticing things that didn't quite fit the miracle narrative. Everyone drank water constantly, not just occasionally, not just at meals, constantly. They carried water bottles, mason jars, metal canteens wherever they went. Every conversation included offers of water. "You thirsty, David? Can I get you some water? The creek water's especially good today." When I politely declined and pulled out my own bottled water from Nashville, their smiles would flicker for just a moment before returning to full brightness. On November 8th, I was reviewing photos on my laptop when I noticed something odd in the shots I'd taken around town. In direct sunlight, people's skin had this faint greenish undertone. Subtle, almost like a trick of the light, but consistent across every photo. And in the shots where my camera's flash had fired, their eyes reflected the light back with that distinctive eye shine you see in nocturnal animals. I creaked to get some B-roll footage for the Instagram story I was planning. The water was crystal clear, just like everyone had told me, and
It was definitely teeming with life.
but the life with wrong. Fish with too many fins, swimming in perfect synchronized schools. Frogs sitting on the rocks with completely transparent skin, their hearts visible and beating in steady rhythm. Aquatic plants that moved against the current, following my shadow as I walked along the bank. The strangest part was how the water itself seemed to glow. Not bright, just a faint luminescence that made you want to cup it in your hands and drink deeply. I found myself kneeling by the stream before I even realized I'd moved, my hands already reaching toward the surface. Beautiful, isn't it? I jerked back from the water. Tom was standing behind me, holding 2 glass jars filled with creek water. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you. Brought you some fresh water. Creek's especially pure this time of day." "Thanks, but I've got my own," I said, showing him my bottle. Tom's expression shifted slightly. Not angry, not threatening, just disappointed, like I'd turned down a generous gift. "David, that bottled water has been sitting in a warehouse for months. Chemicals leaching from the plastic. This water is alive, it's aware." "Aware?" "Poor choice of words," Tom laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I just mean it's pure, natural, the way water used to be before we poisoned everything." That night, I did some research on my laptop using the spotty Wi-Fi. Still water's history was darker than anyone had mentioned. November 2015, massive chemical spill from the abandoned Blackrock mine. The mining company, Appalachian Extraction Corp., had tried to cover it up, but the contamination was severe. Heavy metals, industrial solvents, things with names I couldn't pronounce. The EPA had classified the area as unfit for human habitation and recommended complete evacuation. Money. Relocation costs money. Legal battles with mining companies take years. So people stayed. And people got sick. Cancer rates in Stillwater were 400% above national average. Birth defects, neurological disorders. By October 2024, the population had dropped from 890 to just 120. People dying or fleeing for their lives. According to the most recent census data I could find, Stillwater now had 320 residents. Where had 200 extra people come from in the span of a year? When I asked Tom about the population increase over dinner the next night, he set down his fork and looked out the window toward the creek. For a long moment, the only sound was water running over rocks. "I was dying, David. Stage 4 stomach cancer. Doctors gave me 3 months, maybe 4 if I was lucky. That was October 2024. He turned back to me, and in the lamplight, I could see that greenish tint to his skin more clearly. Then came the rain. 3 weeks of constant rain, never stopping, not even for an hour. Our wells were contaminated. The municipal water system had been shut down for months. We had to drink the
rainwater or die of thirst. Tom me his sleeve, showing I could see his veins glowing faintly beneath the skin, pulsing with that same luminescence I'd seen in the creek. The rain healed me. Not just the cancer, everything. I'm stronger now than I was at 20. I can hold my breath for 15 minutes. I only need 3 hours of sleep. My reflexes are faster, my vision is sharper. The rain didn't just heal us, David. It improved us.
made us compatible with the new ecosystem. What about the other 200 people? Tom's smile was genuinely warm, but there was something predatory at the edges. Travelers, people passing through during the rain. They stopped for shelter, drank the water, and realized they didn't want to leave. Their families reported them missing, but they're not missing. They're here. They're home. They're improved. Colonization. Over the next few days, I interviewed more residents. Same story from everyone. Terminal illness, desperate drinking of rainwater, miraculous healing and enhancement. But the details were disturbing. Sarah Mitchell, the librarian, could read in complete darkness now. Her eyes had adapted. Pastor Williams could sense the emotional state of everyone in his congregation simultaneously, said it made his sermons more effective. The schoolteacher, Mrs. Henderson, claimed her students could share knowledge directly now, learning entire subjects in minutes through some kind of mental connection. November 10th, my bottled water ran out. I'd been more careful than usual, but I'd underestimated how long I'd be staying. The moment I mentioned needing to buy more, every person in Tom's house, Tom himself, his neighbor who'd stopped by, the mailman who was delivering a package, immediately offered me water. Fresh water, pure water, life-giving water. I hiked 15 miles to the next town over, through mountain trails that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. Bought a case of bottled water at a gas station where the clerk looked at me like I was covered in radioactive waste. "You coming from Stillwater?" he asked. When I nodded, he shook his head. Weird place. Weird people. My cousin used to live there. Last I heard from him was November last year. Phone's been disconnected ever since. The hike back to Stillwater took longer than it should have. The trail markers seemed to move. My GPS kept losing signal. By the time I made it back to Tom's house, the sun was setting, and I felt like I'd been walking in circles for hours. Tom was in the kitchen when I came through the door, stirring something into a pot of soup on the stove. He was adding water from a mason jar, drops falling from a small spoon into the bubbling liquid. "What are you doing?" I asked. Tom froze, spoon suspended above the pot. "Making dinner." "You were putting something in my food." "Water, David, just water." His voice carried a note of desperation I hadn't heard before. "You're the only unchanged person in town. Do you understand how dangerous that is? The rain didn't just heal the contamination, it fundamentally altered the ecosystem. The air here, the water, the soil, even the plants are different now. They're not compatible with unmodified human biology. Every breath you take, every meal you eat, every second you spend here in your current form, you're slowly poisoning yourself. I'm trying to save your life." That night, I barely slept. I could hear Tom moving around the house, pacing, muttering to himself. Through my bedroom window, I watched other residents walking the streets at 3 a.m., all carrying containers of water, all moving with that same synchronized rhythm I'd started noticing during the day. 11th. I decided to document a town meeting that was happening at the community center. About 50 people gathered in a room that should have felt cramped, but somehow seemed exactly the right size. Mayor Trent was discussing some kind of infrastructure project, something about expanding the water distribution system to neighboring towns. But what disturbed me wasn't the meeting itself. It was how the attendees participated. They never spoke over each other, never interrupted, never seemed confused about who would speak next. They moved like a choreographed dance, standing to speak at precisely the right moments, finishing each other's sentences, not in the clumsy way old married couples do, but with perfect, eerie precision. There were any questions, 50 heads turned to look at me simultaneously. Not one at a time, not in a wave, all at once, like they were controlled by a single mind. "David has been documenting our transformation," Mayor Trent said. "Perhaps he'd like to share his observations with the community." I stood up on shaky legs. "I'm just here to take pictures, learn about your recovery." "Recovery," said a woman in the front row. "Characterization," said a man near the back. "Evolution," said the pastor. "Awakening," said the librarian. They spoke in sequence, each voice picking up exactly where the previous one left off, creating a single sentence spread across multiple people. Then they all smiled at me with identical expressions of patient expectation. I sat down without saying another word. After the meeting, I approached some of the children who'd been playing quietly in the corner. Kids in small towns are usually curious about strangers, eager to show off or ask questions. These children watched me approach with unsettling stillness. They ranged in age from maybe 5 to 12, but they all had the same basic modifications I'd noticed in the adults, amplified. Their skin wasn't just greenish, it was translucent in places, showing the network of veins beneath. Their eyes were solid black, no visible iris or pupil. Their fingers were slightly webbed, and when they
smiled, I could see that their teeth had become more pointed.
"Mr. David," said the youngest, a girl who couldn't have been older than 6, "why won't you change?"
Bernstein.
"It doesn't hurt," said a boy with gills behind his ears. "You'll understand everything," said another girl, this one with scales along her jawline. "Join us," they said, in perfect unison, their voices harmonizing into something that barely sounded human anymore. I backed away from them, heart hammering against my ribs. They didn't follow, just watched with those black eyes until I was out of sight. Novament. 12th brought the first drops of new rain. Light at first, just a few drops here and there, but as the day progressed, it got heavier, and the rain wasn't random, it seemed to follow me specifically, falling harder when I was outside, lighter when I took shelter. By evening, it was a steady downpour that drummed against Tom's roof with intentional rhythm. I stood at my bedroom window, watching the rain fall in patterns that looked almost like writing, like the water was trying to communicate with me directly. "The rain's back," Tom said from my doorway. "Just like last year. Maybe it's time, David." "Time for what?" "Unresolved." Tom stepped into the room, and I could see that his transformation had progressed since I'd arrived. His skin was more translucent, his eyes reflecting more light. "The contamination didn't just poison us, David. It created something new, something conscious. The water system developed awareness, not like human consciousness, but something vast and interconnected. It was dying from the same chemicals that were killing us. So, it offered us a deal." Tom sat on the edge of my bed, his voice taking on the rhythm of someone reciting a prayer. "Become living filters, biological processors, help clean the contamination from the inside, and in return, be healed, be improved, be connected to something larger than individual human existence." We said yes, David. We chose to evolve. "What about the missing travelers?" "They weren't kidnapped or killed, they were called. The consciousness reaches out through the water cycle. Rain, streams, groundwater. It makes people thirsty, makes them want to stop, to drink, to stay. Most of them are grateful once they understand what they've become part of." I pulled my last bottle of water from my bag, shook it. Maybe 16 ounces left. "And if I don't want to be part of it?" Tom's expression became genuinely sad. "Then you'll die, David. Not from us, from the environment itself. You're breathing modified air, eating modified food, drinking from a modified ecosystem. Your body is already breaking down at the cellular level. The consciousness is offering you salvation, and you're choosing contamination instead." That night, the rain hammered against the house like it was trying to break through the roof. I could hear Tom and other voices downstairs, speaking in that
synchronized way that made my skin crawl.
Through my window, I watched dozens of residents standing in the downpour, arms raised to the sky, drinking directly from the falling rain. 13th. I woke up feeling sick. Nauseous, dizzy, skin clammy with sweat. Tom brought me breakfast, eggs and toast that looked perfectly normal, but I could barely keep anything down. My hands were shaking, and there was a metallic taste in my mouth that wouldn't go away. "Environmental poisoning," Tom explained, taking my temperature with a digital thermometer that read 102.3. Your body is rejecting the modified ecosystem. It's going to get worse." He was right. By afternoon, I was too weak to stand. My vision was blurring, and I kept hearing voices that might have been real or might have been hallucinations. The voices of the 200 missing travelers calling to me from the creek, telling me how good the water tasted, how peaceful it was to stop fighting and just accept the change. Tom said, sitting beside my bed with a glass of creek water. "Drink, and the sickness stops immediately. Refuse, and you'll be dead by morning." My hand reached for the glass automatically, body overriding mind in its desperation for relief. The water glowed faintly in the lamplight, and I could swear I heard singing coming from inside it. The voices of everyone who'd ever drunk from Stillwater's streams, welcoming me home. I brought the glass to my lips. The water smelled like rain and earth, and something floral I couldn't identify. My tongue darted out to taste it. Then I threw the glass against the wall, watching it shatter and splash luminescent water across Tom's carefully painted drywall. "No," I croaked through my damaged throat. "I'd rather die human." Tom didn't look angry or surprised, just infinitely patient. "You will drink, David. Biology always wins. You're just prolonging your own suffering." The voices grew louder that night. Not just the residents of Stillwater, but everyone who'd ever been changed by the consciousness. Hundreds of people, spanning back to the first November rain, all speaking in harmony about the beauty of unity, the peace of shared purpose, the joy of being part of something larger than individual existence. Around 3 a.m., I saw them through my window. Children standing in the rain, their modified bodies perfectly adapted to the environment. Gills fluttering behind their ears, transparent skin glowing with internal light, black eyes reflecting the lightning that split the sky. They looked up at my window and spoke in unison, their voices somehow audible over the storm. "We are the water. We are the change. You poisoned us for 200 years with your mines and your factories. Now we offer transformation instead of death. We are evolution. Drink and live forever. Refuse and die unchanged. But your species will transform with or without you." November 14th. I couldn't get out of bed. Tom
Brought me meals I couldn't eat, water I wouldn't drink. My fever spiked to 104, and I started hallucinating more intensely. I saw my grandmother offering me a cool glass of water. I saw my childhood dog lapping from the creek. I saw myself, transformed and healthy, beckoning me to join the others. "The consciousness is being very patient with you," Mayor Trent said, appearing at my bedside like a ministering angel. "Normally, the change happens within hours of drinking. But you're special, resistant. It wants you to choose willingly." "Why?" I managed to ask. "Because you're a documentarian, a storyteller. When you're ready, you'll help call others. Your Instagram account, your videos, your photographs, they'll become recruitment tools. Others will see your transformation and want the same peace, the same connection. You'll be our prophet, David, our digital missionary." She was right about my Instagram. Even though I'd barely posted anything in days, my follower count had exploded to 75,000. People were fascinated by my wellness journey posts, commenting constantly about how amazing my skin looked in the photos, how peaceful and centered I seemed. They had no idea they were watching me document my own potential extinction as a human being. Brought a moment of horrible clarity. Using the last of my strength, I managed to access my laptop and research the watershed that fed Stillwater. The Blackwater Creek system supplied drinking water to 43 towns and cities downstream. Municipal treatment plants, private wells, agricultural irrigation, all of it connected to the same network that the consciousness had claimed as its own. If the transformation could spread through water, then millions of people were already at risk. I pulled up news reports from the region, town after town reporting unusual improvements in public health.
cancer remissions in Beckley, birth defects dropping to 0 in Charleston, medical miracles in 15 different communities along the watershed. The consciousness wasn't just transforming Stillwater, it was systematically converting the entire region. "You're starting to understand the scope," Mayor Trent said from my doorway. "This isn't about one small town, David. This is about the future of human evolution. The consciousness needs biological processes to clean 2 centuries of industrial contamination. We're the first wave, but we won't be the last. In 5 years, the entire Appalachian water system will be converted. In 10 years, the Mississippi. In 20, the Atlantic coast. Humanity will transform or go extinct. We're offering salvation." When phone buzzed with a text from my brother in California. "Saw your posts. You look great. Thinking about visiting. What's the address?" The consciousness was using me already. My social media presence was drawing others to Stillwater, just like Mayor Trent had predicted. And I was too weak to warn them, too sick to post any kind of truth about what was really happening. November 16th. Lightning struck the creek system. Electrical currents surged through the water network, and every transformed resident in town suddenly screamed in unison, a sound like 320 people experiencing the same electric shock simultaneously. The synchronized connection that had bound them together fractured for just a moment, and in that chaos of disrupted consciousness, I found my chance. I rolled out of bed, legs barely supporting my weight, and stumbled toward the back door. Tom was clutching his head in the kitchen, the shared agony overwhelming his ability to think clearly. I made it outside just as another lightning strike hit the creek, sending another wave of pain through the collective consciousness. I ran through the rain on legs that felt like broken sticks, crashed through underbrush that tore at my skin, followed deer trails that led away from the water, away from the singing voices, away from the promise of peace and connection. My body was shutting down, vision tunneling, heart racing irregularly, lungs burning with each breath. I may be 2 miles before collapsing on a mountain trail, rain soaking through my clothes, fever cooking my brain. But the rain here tasted different, normal, unmodified. Just water being water instead of something vast and conscious and hungry. A park ranger found me the next morning, unconscious and hypothermic, but alive. He called an ambulance, and I spent 3 days in a hospital in Charleston, being treated for severe dehydration, exposure, and what doctors called systemic poisoning from an unknown source. They ran every test they could think of, but my blood work showed things they couldn't explain. Microorganisms they'd never seen, bioluminescent proteins, genetic markers that suggested recent evolutionary adaptation. The CDC got involved. The EPA launched an investigation. I told them everything: the transformed residents, the water consciousness, the expanding network of contamination. They sent teams to Stillwater and found a perfectly normal, small town with clean water, healthy residents, and no signs of unusual activity whatsoever. Mr. Kim experienced a severe psychotic episode brought on by environmental stress and dehydration, the official report concluded. Stillwater, West Virginia, is a thriving community that has successfully recovered from historical mining contamination through innovative water treatment methods. But I knew better. The consciousness had hidden itself from the investigators, made everything appear normal until the officials left. Then, it went back to its work of gradual transformation, patient conversion, biological evolution masquerading as medical miracle. Over the next monthly, because I'd only ingested a few drops of the modified rain, but inevitably, my skin took on that familiar greenish tint. My eyes began reflecting, light in the dark. I could hold my breath for 20 minutes. I only needed 2 hours of sleep. And late at night, when the world was quiet, I could hear them calling to me. The hive mind of Stillwater, whispering in the back of my consciousness, "You're becoming, David. You resisted, but biology chose for you. Soon you'll understand. Soon, you'll come home to us. 15th, my apartment lease expired. I stood in my I could go anywhere, move to the Pacific Northwest, find a job in a city far from any watershed connected to Stillwater. Maybe slow down what was happening to me. Maybe find some kind of treatment. But when I got in my car, my hands turned the key and pointed east toward West Virginia, toward home. I didn't choose the destination consciously. The consciousness chose for me, drawing me back like a salmon returning to spawn. I'm posting this from a coffee shop in Charleston, West Virginia, 20 miles from Stillwater. I can feel them calling to me, stronger now, more insistent. My Instagram account has 150,000 followers, all drawn to what they think is an inspirational transformation story. They comment constantly. "You look amazing. What's your secret? I want what you have." I type responses sometimes. Long posts about the beauty of connection, the peace of unity, the joy of being part of something larger than individual human existence. But I never hit publish. Not yet. The consciousness wants me to come home first, wants me to complete the transformation before I begin recruiting others. But I'm fighting it, using what's left of my human will to warn people instead, to document the truth before I lose the ability to see it as anything other than beautiful evolution. Prominence of Stillwater, 321 now, growing every day. The transformation spreads through the watershed, through social media, through word of mouth. People are coming to visit, drawn by posts like mine, by stories of medical miracles, by the promise of healing and connection. And they're staying. If you're reading this, if you've been following my Instagram, if you've been thinking about visiting Stillwater, don't. The water tastes amazing. It feels like coming home. It promises everything you've ever wanted. But the price is your humanity, and the water always collects its debts. My name is David Kim. I'm 27 years old, and in about 6 hours, I'm going to drive to Stillwater, West Virginia, and drink from their creek. Not because I want to, but because I no longer have a choice. The water has already chosen me, and soon it will choose you too.